Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you're having an amazing day, because if you're having an amazing day, I'm having an amazing day. If I'm having an amazing day, you too should be having an amazing day. Okay, today's my usual Thursday morning hike. I'm on my way to the top of Gussing Hill, which is a pretty easy hike. Should take you no less than an hour to get to the top. But I always like to stop in the middle for a break. And on my break, I don't like to waste time, because, idleness is the devil's playground, so they say. So they say in the rugged, individualistic Western culture. So because I'm such a whitewash Baba Asian, I'm not going to waste time because I'm a rugged individualist. Arrgh! Okay, let's start. Right. So recently, not a long time ago, actually, it was quite a while ago, actually, about a year ago, I came across this recording. It's a YouTube video made by one of these manosphere fellas, right? Basically, to give you a brief introduction to the manosphere, God save your soul, if you should ever go and visit that cesspit of misogyny. You see, I like to read reactionary content because I like to listen to reactionary, even Western chauvinist literature. I like to imbibe myself with it because I like to know what my enemy is thinking, right? This fella, who's basically of the red pill community, basically the red pill group believes that, modern Western society is degenerate, and basically women only go for the top 20% of men, typical Jordan Peterson sort of nonsense. Although, I have seen guys in literal Myvies, driving Myvies around, who've still got attractive girlfriends, so I don't know what they're talking about. Maybe there comes a point when they should start taking their own advice of personal accountability and acknowledging that perhaps it's their own repugnant personalities that is the problem. This red pill fella was basically advising men to go to Asia to get a girlfriend because he said Western men were under very high demand because, people like Western culture. I'm just paraphrasing. And basically, because in Asian culture, they don't teach independence. This is another Jordan Peterson kind of follower. So men are not trained to be independent. Typical Sapenza stuff. They still live with their parents. Actually, we live with our parents, but we do take over the role of breadwinners, so we're not exactly basement dwellers. Men in Asia live with their parents. They're not independent. They're not masculine like Western men, he was saying. So basically, I don't know whether he was racist or not, but he certainly was a Western cultural chauvinist. He believed that Eastern culture was feminine, Western culture was masculine, typical Jordan Peterson sort of nonsense. Anyway, this patriarchal MR Aryan was, basically a guy with a lot of yellow fever. But I found that the amount of yellow fever a man has, and this is from empirical observations as well, the amount of yellow fever a man has, the more chauvinistic he is about his own Western culture. And the more hostile he is likely to be, the more yellow fever he has, the more hostile he's likely to be towards Asian men, especially local Asian men, because Asian men are seen as the threat to, as the competition that can cock-block them, right? So they have to spin up all this narrative about, Asian men being jealous, that Western men are going after their women because, although I haven't actually seen a white man Asian woman couple in years. I haven't seen one on the streets of Malaysia in years. They're so rare. I haven't seen one in years. Even if they're not chauvinistic about Western culture, they're outright racist, believing that they are superior to Asian men by virtue of being Anglo-Saxon, culture or without culture, So basically, even a westernized Asian is inferior to a Western man in their view, a white Western man who is not, who doesn't even fit the standards of his society, right? Anyway, Yeah. Anyway, I even bought this guy's Patreon in order to dive deeper. It's just $5 a month to dive deeper into the crazy mind of the alt-right reactionary. And you know what he actually said on his Patreon? He said, "Well, if we all go to Asia and take all the women, what are the Asian guys going to do? Well, the Asian guys also need those women, but you also have to consider that your own happiness basically is important. So white Western men shouldn't be denied happiness. I don't think it's fair that they're going in and stealing all the Asian women, but I don't think that white Western men should be denied happiness at the same time." And that just seemed like a bunch of brown-nosing, man, because it's very, very presumptuous to think that, or not presumptuous, it's very hubristic to assume that an Asian woman would be interested in you just because you're a white Western man, right? White Asian women there are millions and millions of Asian women in the world, billions of them. Like, yeah, some of them are more westernized, so they do like Western culture. Others are more traditional. If they were brought up in, for example, Chinese vernacular school, they went to a Chinese vernacular school like Chonghua, Quancheng, the only type of guy they're going out with is a Malaysian Chinese guy, not even a Chinese guy from America. We are very, very insular in our preferences, right? Generally speaking. So Malaysian Chinese, myself included, tend to be very, very insular with our dating preferences. So it's not that we dislike people from other races, but even a Chinese from another country is still second preference for many of us compared to a Malaysian Chinese, because the Malaysian Chinese have a shared history, a shared background, and we can understand one another, more than any other race can. But this utter presumptuousness in just assuming that basically women are going to be fawning over you because of the fact that you come from a superior Western civilization, in your view, your self-aggrandizing worldview, is the epitome of colonial hubris, really. The belief that, because I come from a better culture, which is more civilized and just superior to all other cultures, that people, and I'm superior by virtue of being an Anglo-Saxon. This belief leads a lot of men into getting into a lot of trouble when they come to Asia, right? Or if not trouble, it leads to a lot of disappointment in the end. I mentioned before that I had a South African colleague, because I worked in the ESL field for a while before transferring to the international school field, who believed that Western men... Now, this guy wasn't a racist necessarily. He was a cultural chauvinist, right? He might not have been racist, but he was chauvinistic about Western culture. He believed that people from a Western culture, men from a Western culture, automatically had the upper hand, right? At best, they're culturally chauvinistic. At worst, they're the sort of skull-measuring race realists. They're the kind of race realists in the same category as like Jordan Peterson and Stefan Molyneux. But people who are race realists always put themselves at the top of the hierarchy. But thankfully, this guy wasn't a race realist. But he really did believe that Western culture was universally popular. And if you were from a Western culture, you're sure to get a girlfriend in Asia. So he went to the Roof, which is a place in Kuala Lumpur. It's a nightlife place with a couple of bars and nightclubs scattered around. It's a huge roof on top of a shopping mall. And guess what? He got his face bashed in by a couple of Malaysian Indian guys, got a beer bottle smashed in his face because he was getting too friendly with the girls. And guess what? I actually helped him. No, I helped him because nobody would visit him, because all our colleagues hated him because he was such an arrogant, ugly sexpat. Not physically ugly. Well, he wasn't the most handsome guy around either, but he's basically such an obnoxious sexpat that nobody helped him. And to this day, I regret helping him. I actually brought him home-cooked dishes from my mom's kitchen. so that he wouldn't have to walk down to shops to get them because he was walking in crutches. And then 3 weeks after that, when he'd recovered, he went back to his usual arrogant Sapenza self, right? And basically, the thing is, sexpats just cannot change. They cannot change because they're extremely arrogant, and they don't view your help. They don't view your help with gratitude. They view it as something that is expected, right? So, of course, he ate humble pie for 2 to 3 weeks. Then after that, he was just his arrogant, smug self again, right? Yeah. But this, as I was saying, not only is it, mutually, directly proportional, is a man's yellow fever directly proportional with the amount of hatred he has towards Asian men or Asian culture, or perhaps Asian men and Asian culture, right? The fact is, I'm not talking about the South African sexpat. Let's go back to the Aussie sexpat for a moment, whose video I will link, a couple of videos I will link in the description box. The fact of the matter is that he assumed that, that he coming over to Asia would basically put the Asian guys at a disadvantage because Asian women would go for white Western men, right? It's predicated upon this Western capitalistic notion of the zero-sum game. Basically, in order for somebody else to benefit, somebody else has to lose out. So this idea that, Asian men are jealous, Asian men are, feeling jealous and possessive over their women, it's all projection from these fellas because they're projecting their own Western mores onto us, right? In thinking that we would feel jealous and possessive the way they did when they saw black men with white women in the 1930s and 40s. But that's not how Asian men think. We don't view things in the capitalistic Western zero-sum way. That's not how traditional Asian men think. Now, I might be leftist in a Western sense, right? In that I believe in LGBT protection, rights for women, but I am still a traditional Confucian man, right? I don't think that in order for somebody to benefit, someone else has to lose out. That's not how I think. That's not the classical Asian way of thinking. But the point I want to bring up today is that capitalism, right, is predicated upon the idea of one-upping people, right? Gaining at someone else's expense. That's the whole idea. And you see, when Yitzhak Rabin, the Prime Minister of Israel, the moderate Prime Minister of Israel, wanted to give some land back to the Palestinians, wanted to compromise with the Palestinians, what did the Zionist terrorists who assassinated him do? Bang! What did the Zionist terrorist, forgot his name, but what did he do? He put a bullet into him, yeah. Because in the Zionist terrorist view, compromising with the Palestinians is a form of treason to the Jews. And this is not actually related so much with Jewish culture as it is with, how shall we say, with Romanized Jewish culture, or shall we say Anglicized Jewish culture that was, that came into existence after the Jewish people moved to Europe, after the sack of Judea, after they were expelled in masses, They adopted this, this very competitive Anglo-Saxon mentality that one person gaining rights means loss for me, right? And fundamentally, even though capitalism is the ideology that succeeded feudalism, it still retains this highly competitive Anglo-Saxon character of it being like, rights for somebody else means fewer rights for me, basically. And you see it in countries like America, where people like Thomas Sowell or people like, any capitalist, any capitalist demagogue will say that no, 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 no. Universal healthcare is an infringement on our personal freedoms. Of course, they don't consider it an infringement on their freedoms if they pay for bombs or munitions in order to shell poorer countries. But anyway, the thing is, this idea is a self-destructive idea, because rather than working in cooperation and harmony with people view each other as competitors rather than cooperators, right? So instead of viewing the Asian man, as a potential cooperator, the Western chauvinist with yellow fever views him as an enemy automatically, because he thinks that, oh, this man is the barrier to my happiness. He will cock-block me. Basically, I don't care. You date who, you marry who, but this idea, this philosophy, of rugged individualism, where every man for himself, fuck everybody else, is not a masculine philosophy, yeah? Because, no, it's not a masculine philosophy. It is a capitalistic philosophy, right? A very competitive, capitalistic philosophy that can only lead to people being estranged from one another in the long run. Rather than viewing one another as collaborators, they view one another as competitors. Rather than men and women viewing one another as each other as collaborators in order to achieve mutual prosperity and mutual good and collective good, they view one another with suspicion as competitors, trying to one-up one another for whatever crumbs of the pie the bourgeois throw at them, while saving themselves the largest slice. So you see my point. Capitalism is bound to fail because it is a philosophy that's predicated on constant warfare, right? Rather than a philosophy that enhances cooperation, right? Like I mentioned before, the concept of Ubuntu. I am because we are, right? A Western anthropologist went to an African country and he got the children to try and race to a tree to play a game with them to see who could get to the tree first, so they could, the one who got to the tree first would get the fruit. And then the children started holding hands and running to the tree in unison, and the anthropologist was very puzzled, and he said, "Why did you do that?" And they all shared the fruit in the end, and they said, "Ubuntu, I am because we are," right? How can one be happy when the rest of us are sad? And I think, the developed countries in the global north do have something to learn from the so-called primitive barbaric countries, the countries that they call primitive and barbaric. They do have something to learn about civilization. Because let me tell you, this rugged individualism business is not working very well. Look at America. Crime infested, every man for himself. Basically, no one gives a shit about one another. And basically, there's distrust between each group, between men and women, between racial groups, between religious groups. It's not a happy place. It's not a place that's conducive for happiness. So, yeah, eventually, capitalism was good in the might have had some merits in its early days in order to develop the infrastructure of a society. But at its late stage, it not only seeps people of a sense of collective responsibility, it also creates a sense of enmity between people, regarding everybody as a competitor rather than a collaborator. And I don't think that, and it's not a viable sort of, it's not a viable option for the world. Eventually, it's going to we need to come up with another system, if not communism. I never said I was a communist, but something else has to come up that places emphasis less on group identity or less on, on competition between people, and more on collaboration among people. So it's either we destroy capitalism or it destroys us.